In a cafe forgotten by time, the smell of cold coffee mixes with the heavy silence of the late afternoon. In the corner of the room, a small table attracts all eyes. Not because of the deflated balloons or the improvised decoration, but because of a solitary cake with several lit candles, shaking slightly under the timid blow of the air conditioning. An elderly veteran, in an old uniform and full of worn medals, stares at the cake as if staring at a painful memory. He's there, sitting silently, while the clock hanging on the wall ticks down the time. Every second, an invisible wound that deepens. The candles go out, one by one, as if the world itself was forgetting that today was supposed to be a special day. The waiter, uncomfortable, tries to occupy himself by cleaning the counter, but he can't avoid stealing glances in that man's direction. Two teenagers on one of the back benches exchange muffled giggles, whispering something about, "It's sad to grow old, forgotten like this." Have you ever witnessed something so unfair? Or, worse, have you ever felt the weight of abandonment on a day that should have been one of joy? The veteran, owner of a story that few there could even imagine, remains serene. He doesn't lower his head. He doesn't shrink. He doesn't surrender. With a slow and solemn movement, he adjusts his old military cap on the table and rests his hand on it, as if holding something sacred. There is a silent strength radiating from him, a presence that needs no words, a respect that should be automatic, but that today, sadly, seems forgotten. Silent strength, honor without applause, respect without an audience. All around, the world continues to spin. Customers come and go, oblivious to the scene that was supposed to stop time. The clock continues to tick of indifference. The American flag, small and dusty in a corner of the diner, seems to watch everything with the same silent pain. How many sacrifices like his are ignored every day? How many heroes walk among us, invisible, carrying scars that time and memory insist on erasing? What you discover now may surprise you. Stay with me, because this story carries something much bigger than a simple forgotten birthday. It carries a lesson about courage, about sacrifice, about the true freedom that we so often take for granted. It carries the silent weight of men who chose discipline over revolt, faith over bitterness, honor over vanity. While the veteran holds his cap tightly, a boy with attentive eyes watches from afar, as if he felt, without really understanding, that he was facing something great. The wind makes the sails flicker again, but this time, something in the air begins to change. A subtle movement, a breath of hope. And it is at that moment, when everything seems lost, that the unexpected happens, changing not only the fate of that silent hero, but also the hearts of everyone who was about to witness what no one would ever forget. The door creaked again, but it wasn't for him. Another customer walked in, ignoring the scene as if the man were just part of the furniture. The veteran didn't even look up. The cake was still there, now with half of the candles already extinguished, as if time had gotten tired of waiting for someone who would never come. The silence that surrounded him was not just that of the environment. It was the heavy echo of memories that no one there cared to know. The waiter passed him with an empty cup, hesitated, but continued on. It wasn't evil. It was that kind of subtle abandonment, made not of harsh words, but of painful absences. Each snicker in the back of the diner felt like a slow jab, like a cruel reminder that, to many, he was just a lonely old man, and not the warrior who once carried the weight of their freedom on his shoulders. Can you imagine the silent pain of waiting for someone who never arrives? To celebrate 90 years of history, alone. If this touched you in any way, leave here in the comments what moved you the most. I really want to know. Each story shared here is like a flame that is lit to honor these silent heroes who still walk among us. And your voice makes all the difference. As the last flames of the cake flickered, the atmosphere seemed to weigh heavier. It was as if the place itself had become ashamed of its coldness. But still, the veteran remained firm. His eyes, tired but alive, stared at the invisible horizon beyond the window, as if seeing something that no one else could see. Maybe he was reliving battles that history didn't tell. Maybe he was remembering friends who were left behind. If this story has captured you so far, if at any point you felt that these values, respect, honor, sacrifice, still matter, I ask you, enjoy this video. It's not just a button. It's a silent gesture of support, a flag raised to say that these heroes still have people who see them. And if you believe that the world needs to hear more stories like this, subscribe to the channel. It's thanks to you that these voices don't go away. May each story like this find new hearts to touch. Here, the memory of true heroes does not die. Here, their silent strength lives on. As time seemed to slow down in that forgotten diner, something small, almost imperceptible, began to change. A look, a whisper, a shy gesture. And that's when everything begins to transform in a way that no one, not even that lone veteran, could have imagined. The teenagers' laughter echoed through the diner like a cruel crack in the air. They didn't try to hide it. One of them, with his cap backwards and cell phone in his hand, pointed openly at the veteran, muttering loud enough to be heard. "Look, not even his family wants to know about him." The humiliation, at that moment, wasn't made of harsh words. It was made of public contempt that pierced deeper than any direct insult. The cake was still there, half melted by the heat of the candles, now almost all of them extinguished, as if each one represented a forgotten memory, a piece of its history that the world simply decided to ignore. The veteran didn't move. His eyes, hardened by years and losses, never looked away for a second. He maintained the same firm posture, his hand still resting on his military cap, as if protecting a sacred symbol. There was a silent nobility there that was difficult to explain. It was the presence of someone who had faced much more than the contempt of immature boys. Someone who, in the face of pain, chose discipline over fury. True strength. The one that doesn't need to scream to be felt. With every second, the environment became heavier. The wind that passed through the revolving door mixed the smell of warm coffee with the dust of time, bringing with it an almost palpable feeling of loneliness. It was as if, in that small, forgotten space, we were witnessing a hidden truth. That often, the greatest heroes live among us invisible, without banners, without tributes, carrying the weight of their own journeys in silence. The murmur increased. Another young man, encouraged by the veteran's lack of reaction, threw a crumpled napkin towards the table, hitting the floor near his feet. The dry sound of paper hitting the floor echoed louder than any scream could have done. The waiter hesitated, looking at the veteran as if silently begging him to react, to somehow defend his dignity. But no, he stood there, unshakable, like a mountain in the face of a childish storm. Can you feel the impact of this moment? This isn't just a story of abandonment. It's a story about decisions. About the daily choice between bowing to contempt or standing tall in honor. Transformation here is not made of big speeches. It's made of small, silent victories against the urge to give up. At the back of the cafeteria, an elderly woman watched everything with teary eyes. She didn't say anything. She knew. I knew that life is made up of these behind the scenes that few want to see. He knew that on that man, there were scars that spoke louder than any youthful insult. And yet, she also remained silent, as if the fear of breaking that sacred moment was greater than her own indignation. The clock on the wall marked another full revolution. Hour after hour, the veteran remained there, motionless, true to his own story. Every breath felt like a silent challenge to the world that had chosen to forget him. Every small movement of his wrinkled hand was loaded with meaning, like a silent prayer for those who had left, and those who, in some way, still remained fighting. Now, I want to go even deeper into this subject. Because the story that was about to be erased suddenly found a ray of hope in the midst of neglect, an unexpected breath of recognition in an environment that seemed destined to ignore him. And if you felt this pain, if at some point you saw in this veteran a piece of your own journey, comment below. I recognize true heroes. Your voice matters more than you think. The silence was so heavy that you could almost hear the sound of loneliness tearing the air. The veteran, sitting in front of his faded cake and his forgotten story, slowly closed his eyes. It wasn't tiredness. It wasn't sadness. It was a silent prayer, a whispered request only to God, so that the strength that had sustained him in so many battles would not fail now, in the face of the cruelest of all, being ignored by those he swore to protect. He didn't flinch. It was not justified. He didn't demand respect. Instead, he rested his right hand on his chest, where he still had his division's old badge attached. The worn texture of the fabric, the smell of old leather, the mark of the years imbued there, all of this was a silent testimony to a life of sacrifice. But that afternoon in that place, his legacy seemed to weigh only on him. To others, it was invisible, like dust in a forgotten corner of history. Deep inside, the young people continued their jokes, perhaps without understanding, perhaps without caring. Laughter seemed to vibrate through the walls of the diner, each echo an invisible needle piercing the man's dignity. And yet, he didn't fight back. The discipline engraved in his spirit since his youth was stronger than any impulse to revolt. It was as if, even now, facing ridicule, he was still in military training, where honor and self-control were not options. They were rules for survival. Time passed slowly. Every second felt like a test. The cake, once vibrant with its 90 flames, was now just a shrunken, forgotten mass. The plastic tablecloth covering the table was stained with spilled coffee. The floor creaked under the distracted footsteps of customers, and the smell from the old ventilation system carried an uncomfortable mix of old grease and resignation. It was a perfect setting to witness what few see. True power doesn't scream. He resists. Those who looked at the veteran perhaps thought they were facing a defeated man. But if they really paid attention, they would see that there was something different there. Something about the way he held his head high. In the slight tremor of your tired hands, struggling not to fall. In the almost military rigidity of his back, which refused to bend, even under the weight of abandonment. It was there, in that silent suffering, that true greatness lived. It wasn't about winning an external war, not anymore. It was about winning the internal war. One that requires not weapons, but courage to face the world's indifference without losing faith in what is right. It was about the conscious decision to choose dignity over despair. What was unfolding before everyone's eyes, there was one of the greatest revelations that life can offer. True freedom is internal. It's a decision, an intimate choice to remain true to who you are, even when no one else recognizes your value. The waiter, perhaps feeling the discomfort growing, passed by the table again and murmured a barely audible, "Happy birthday, sir," with his eyes downcast. There was no immediate response. The veteran just nodded, a small gesture, but full of meaning. It was as if he was saying, "Thank you, but I'm not here for applause." That silent response, that silent respect, invaded the room like an invisible wave, and for a moment, the laughter stopped. The people there didn't know what he had experienced. They didn't know how many fields he had crossed, how many cold nights he had faced without knowing if he would see the dawn. They didn't know about the scars hidden under the lined shirt, nor about the promises whispered in the wind, on the battlefield, asking for strength to return home. And without even knowing it, they were facing someone who was the very definition of transformation. Not the transformation that shines in shop windows or on social media, but the one that happens deep within the soul, forged by sacrifice and discipline. That scene seemed static, as if time had frozen just so everyone could learn something, without them realizing it. That man's mentality was that of someone who had already lost many external battles, but would never allow the internal battle to be lost. His steady gaze, even in the face of humiliation, was a stark reminder that there are values that cannot be erased even by indifference. And it was inevitable to think, how many other stories like this go unnoticed around us? How many other heroes walk among us, mixed in with everyday life, carrying in their slow steps the living history of everything we have achieved as a nation? It's behind the scenes in life that the greatest acts of courage happen, away from the spotlight, away from the applause. And it was there, in that forgotten diner, that one of these stories began to take shape. If you look closely, you'll see that life's great revelations rarely come with trumpets. They hide in subtle details, in small gestures, in hidden truths that only sensitive eyes can capture. A hero's impact is not just in what he did, but in what he continues to teach even without saying a word. Write it in the comments. I value silent strength. Because recognizing this strength is the first step to understanding what respect, honor, and freedom really mean. And as the clock continued its indifferent journey on the wall, something began to change in that environment. A discreet, almost imperceptible movement, but one that promised to completely transform the outcome of that afternoon. The atmosphere in the diner seemed to have changed weight. The teenagers' weak laughter, which had previously echoed without restraint, was now mixed with suspicious, almost restless looks. It was as if they had suddenly realized that this man, silent and still in his pain, was not just another aged face in the middle of the city. Something about him bothered, disturbed, a kind of silent grandeur that couldn't be explained in words, but that imposed itself like an invisible wall in the face of collective indifference. Some whispers began to spread. One of them, coming from a girl serving coffees near the counter, sounded nervous. Did you see? Those medals. They look important. Another, even more whispered, echoed between two tables. Did he fight in Vietnam? Or in World War II? The name of the great battles that shaped the destiny of the world hung in the air like a shadow, trying to find a fit in that man who seemed to carry the weight of history on his tired shoulders. Every wrinkle on his face, marked by time and memory, was like a scar from battles fought far beyond physical fields, battles of the soul, which shape character, harden hope, and strengthen faith. The uniform that covered his chest, although worn, was loaded with a deep meaning that few there were sensitive enough to understand. It was more than fabric. It was a silent declaration of honor, sacrifice, freedom. The veteran's eyes, motionless and fixed on the void, seemed to see beyond those dirty walls, and that cake withering in front of him. It was as if he was caught on a fine line between past and present, between memories of a time when his life depended on his every decision, and the cold reality of being just another forgotten face in the crowd. The hidden truth was that no one there knew who he really was, and yet they could not ignore the invisible force that emanated from his silence. In the corner of the room, a young man, too young to understand the depth of what he was seeing, tried to start a conversation with the group of friends, but his voice broke. Something in the air prevented him from treating that moment with the same levity as before. One of the teenagers, still trying to mock, said, "It must have been one of those who went and came back without any glory." But even he, as he said that, felt the weight of his own contempt slide down his throat. The waiter, now clearly distraught, tried to discreetly peer at the medals on the veteran's chest. He recognized some insignia, symbols of bravery that only those who faced hell head-on could boast. His eyes widened briefly, but he quickly looked away, as if afraid to face the greatness he had ignored for so long. It was inevitable. The collective mentality of the place began to change, slowly and silently. Every customer who entered or left seemed to notice the veteran, and although few had the courage to approach, many began to wonder, who was this man who carried stories in his chest that would never be completely told? What hidden truths were engraved in his unbreakable posture, in his silence filled with dignity? The journey that veteran lived seemed to pulse in the environment, even without a single word spoken. His wrinkled fingers brushed his military cap like someone caressing a living memory, and, in small gestures, he showed a discipline so strong that it made time seem to slow down around him. It was a force so different, so pure, that even the most insensitive began to feel the impact without fully understanding what they were witnessing. Tiny sounds filled the space. The creak of aged wood, the faint hum of the air conditioning, the rustle of newspapers being leafed through in the background. Small details that, in some way, amplified that man's monumental silence. It was as if the entire universe had decided that, at least for a moment, everyone should pay attention. Everyone should learn something that books, films, or speeches cannot teach. What it really means to have courage, have discipline, have faith. As the minutes stretched on, more eyes were drawn to that solitary figure. The cake, now forgotten even by the melted candles, seemed a sad symbol of how much modern society has forgotten to value what really matters. The impact of seeing someone so great treated as invisible began to be etched in the minds of those who were there, even if no one had the courage to admit it. Behind the scenes of that seemingly banal scene, a silent revelation was happening. Not all heroes wear capes. Not all great men have their stories written in books. Many walk among us in silence, expecting not applause, but only respect. A respect that cannot be bought or forced. A respect that needs to be born from the deepest truth of the human being. The truth of recognizing that the freedom we have was too expensive to be forgotten. And as conversation slowed and eyes filled with unanswered questions, a certainty began to grow. That man had something to teach. Something that most there desperately needed to remember. And that soon, in a way that no one imagined, it would come to light in such a powerful way that it would change not only that day, but the mentality of everyone who would witness what was about to happen. Comment there. I see the strength in small attitudes. Because sometimes it's in those quiet details that life's greatest lessons are hidden. The doorbell creaked with a metallic wail that cut through the heavy silence of the room. For an instant, all eyes turned, almost by reflex. He wasn't just another distracted customer walking in. Something about the energy that invaded the space changed the weight of the air, as if a new chapter was about to be written there, without anyone being able to predict the depth it would have. The group that entered did not seem to match the atmosphere of that sad afternoon. Young people, simple clothes, serious faces. In the hands of one of them, a folded American flag, held with so much respect that it seemed to carry a piece of history. Others carried red, white, and blue balloons, some half deflated, others still vibrant, shivering in the warm breeze that escaped outside. None of them spoke loudly. None laughed. They came motivated by something greater than the simple desire to do a good deed. They came moved by the hidden truth they had sensed in the air, a truth that said that sacrifice could not be ignored forever. Without any rehearsal, without ceremony, they began to sing. The first words of Happy Birthday echoed weakly, timidly, as if afraid to break the moment. But with each verse, their voices grew, gaining strength, filling the cafeteria with a sound that seemed to carry all the respect, all the reverence that until then had been denied to that old soldier. It was as if, finally, freedom had found its voice in that small, forgotten corner of the world. The veteran looked up, surprised. What he saw before him were not just faces. They were souls, gathered around him, declaring without words that he was not alone. The cake, already almost forgotten, shone under the yellow light of the lamps, reflecting on the tears that he, for the first time, didn't bother to hide. It wasn't sadness. It was something much deeper, much more powerful. It was the feeling that, even after everything, honor could still be restored. The sound of the song mixed with the creak of chairs being moved away. Other customers, previously indifferent, got up slowly, like someone waking up from a dream. Men took off their hats. Women placed their hands on their chests. Even the waiter, his voice breaking, joined the improvised chorus. It was impossible not to be touched. It was impossible not to be swept away by that invisible wave of respect and gratitude that now filled the place. The veteran's hands shook slightly as he tried to stand up. One of the young men ran up to him, extending his arm in support. There was sincerity in that gesture. It wasn't mercy. It was recognition. The veteran accepted the help, but stood up with the dignity of someone who never stopped being a warrior, even on the darkest days. His presence, now illuminated by collective emotion, seemed larger than the room itself. The entire environment vibrated with a different energy. It was as if everyone there had suddenly rediscovered something that the rush of the modern world had buried, the silent impact of true heroes. And the most impressive thing is that that moment had not been planned. There were no speeches, there were no protocols. It was pure, it was real. And perhaps, precisely for this reason, it was so transformative. As the chant ended in an emotional whisper, the young man holding the flag knelt before the veteran. With trembling hands, he offered the folded symbol with the same reverence with which treasure is offered. The veteran, with a look that mixed surprise and gratitude, received the flag and held it to his chest, as if hugging all his friends who remained behind in the distant fields of war. Outside, the sun began to set, staining the sky with golden and orange tones, as if nature itself wanted to witness this reunion between generations. A soft wind passed through the still ajar door, making the balloons dance slowly, as if they were small banners of a new time, a time where, even if belatedly, emotional justice found its way. The waiter, teary-eyed, walked up to the counter and placed a small, hastily made sign on it. Reserved for heroes. It was simple, it was imperfect, but it was true. And in that gesture, the past, present, and future met. There was no longer room for indifference, just for respect. On the faces of the young people who had started that spontaneous movement, there was something stronger than pride. There was transformation. The clear realization that every decision we make, no matter how small it may seem, can generate an impact that can last generations. That small gestures can rewrite stories that the world had tried to erase. The veteran, holding the flag, looked around. His eyes roamed each face as if he wanted to memorize that moment forever. I didn't say anything. It didn't need to. His expression said it all. I fought for this, for moments like this, for people like this. The entire cafeteria remained in respectful silence, as if any word could break the magic that had formed there. It was the kind of silence that carries meaning, that echoes louder than any applause. And as the sun hid behind the horizon, leaving only golden light to bathe the scene, a certainty settled in the hearts of everyone there. True greatness does not need to announce itself. She simply is. Silent. Indestructible. Comment there. I recognize true greatness. Because recognizing is the first step to honoring what really matters. The young man held the makeshift microphone with shaking hands, the thread of newfound courage vibrating in his voice. An absolute silence fell over the diner, broken only by the distant noise of the wind outside, as if even nature awaited every word that was about to be spoken. Everyone's eyes were fixed on that scene that just a few days before would have seemed improbable. And then he said, with a respect that no textbook could teach, "Ladies and gentlemen, before you, a true war hero. He fought for our freedom. He served with honor. He carries in his chest stories that not even history could tell." The words cut through the air like a real blade, hitting every heart present. It was impossible not to feel the impact of what was being revealed. That humble figure, previously the target of ridicule, now stood gigantic in front of everyone. Every scar hidden under the uniform, every look lost in the void of longing, every heavy breath carried a piece of the freedom that everyone there enjoyed without even realizing it. The waiter, who until then had been trying to maintain his composure behind the counter, dropped the dish towel he was holding and put his hand to his mouth in a futile attempt to contain his tears. The man who served coffee and burgers every day now found himself faced with a brutal reality. He, too, had failed to recognize the silent greatness that dwelt among them. Shame was visible in their eyes, but also gratitude that there was still time to correct the mistake. The teenagers who sneered, who threw venomous comments like invisible spears, were now unable to sustain their gaze. Heads down, hands stuffed in pockets, uncomfortable steps backwards. The truth, when it comes so raw, leaves no room for excuses. All that remains is to face your own ignorance and hope that, from then on, transformation happens from the inside out. The veteran, at the center of it all, seemed to absorb that moment with the same serenity with which he had endured moments of contempt. There was no expression of revenge on his face, no trace of revenge. Just a deep understanding, that wisdom that only those who walked side by side with death can carry in their eyes. He slowly raised his hand in military salute, a gesture so charged with emotion and dignity that it made the knees of many there weak. Freedom, honor, silent strength. Every word seemed to echo silently in everyone's chest. It was as if the weight of the past had finally been recognized, not with medals, not with parties, but with what really mattered: genuine respect. The kind of respect that is not imposed, is earned. The young man at the microphone continued, now with tears streaming freely down his face. This man, ladies and gentlemen, carried on his shoulders the hope of generations. He stood up in fields that few of us would have the courage to tread. He sacrificed his youth so that we could live ours in peace. And today he teaches us that true strength is in remaining standing, even when the entire world seems to have forgotten who you are. Emotion overflowed everywhere. Some approached the table, shyly, wanting to shake the veteran's hand, as if silently asking for forgiveness. Others just knelt discreetly, in a gesture of humility, in the face of a greatness that, until minutes ago, was invisible to their eyes. Every detail of that moment seemed to have come from behind the scenes of a story that had never been told. Golden evening light filtered through the fogged windows, enveloping the scene in an almost sacred glow. The muffled sound of restrained breathing, the creak of the old flooring under hesitant feet, the emotional trembling of the outstretched hands. Everything created a scene that would be forever etched in the memory of those who had the privilege of being there. And the veteran, holding the American flag tightly to his chest, took a deep breath. Perhaps at that moment, he was not just experiencing a belated recognition. Perhaps he was rediscovering a lost piece of his own journey. A piece that said that, despite all the pain, faith in people was still worth it. That no matter how much the world changes, the deepest values, honor, sacrifice, respect, continue to live on in the decisions we choose to make every day. It was impossible not to notice the transformation that took over the environment. Everyone's mentality had been touched, changed. And, without saying a single word, that veteran showed that the greatest strength of a true hero is not in his weapons, nor in his medals, but in the ability to forgive, to teach, and to continue walking even when the road seems empty. As he gazed at the horizon through the diner's window, a revelation seemed to hang in the air. Life's great lessons don't impose themselves. They reveal themselves in moments of quiet courage and unwavering faith. And when these moments happen, they invite us to decide what kind of people we want to be from now on. Write it in the comments. I choose to honor true heroes. Because every word, every gesture of respect is a real step towards a better world. Night slowly descended over the small town, dyeing the sky a deep blue, like a silent cloak covering everything that had been exposed to daylight. The diner's dim lights cast elongated shadows on the old wooden floor, each mark, each groove, now carrying a greater weight, as if even the floor the veteran stood on knew he had received something sacred that afternoon. He remained seated for a while, observing the movement around him with the serenity of someone who has seen the world shatter and rebuild so many times that he has learned to trust the silent process of transformation. There was no anger in his eyes. There was no vanity. There was only the solid presence of someone who carried within him a hidden truth. That true strength does not require recognition. It simply exists, changes the environment, transforms mentalities, marks lives. People still approached in silence, some just touching his shoulder quickly, others leaving small notes on the table, with hastily written messages, but filled with an emotion that didn't need well-structured words to be felt. Gratitude, reverence, respect. Expressions that, at that moment, were manifested in teary eyes, trembling hands, shy smiles full of shame for everything that had been neglected for so long. The veteran, with his old uniform and his medals discreetly gleaming in the dim light, seemed like a pillar standing tall amidst the confusion of human emotions. He didn't seek glory. He didn't want the spotlight. He just existed, a silent rock reminding everyone of the price of freedom that we so easily forget when we become distracted by the ease of modern life. It was easy to understand, looking at him, how the mindset of a true hero is forged, not in the celebration of days of victory, but in the silent endurance of days of oblivion. Not in applause, but in the strength to continue doing the right thing, even when no one is looking. It was there, behind the scenes of that forgotten diner, that one of life's greatest revelations unfolded before attentive eyes. True greatness doesn't ask for permission. It is built on daily decisions, on small silent battles, on an unshakable commitment to values that do not change with the wind. Many who were there would never see the world the same way again. Every story we hear, every gesture we witness, shapes our gaze. And witnessing a man who chose the path of absolute dignity, even in the face of the invisibility imposed by an ungrateful world, is something that plants deep roots in the soul. A painful reminder that time is relentless, and that we often honor too late those who most deserve to be celebrated in life. That veteran's journey, although silent, was more impactful than any fiery speech. The transformation he caused there was not noisy. It happened inside each person who witnessed that moment. A change of mentality, a small break in the selfish routine of everyday life, a seed planted in the fertile land of consciousness. And that's what we need to reflect on. How often do we ignore the true heroes that cross our path? How many times do we postpone the word of thanks, the gesture of respect, the simple recognition of the sacrifice that allows us to live freely? The truth is harsh. Most of the great stories of courage and sacrifice will never be told. They dissolve in time, forgotten by generations too quick to look back. But not everything needs to be lost. Each of us has the power to stop this cycle, to consciously decide to honor while there is still time, to recognize the silent strength that built the ground beneath our feet, to recover respect, not as a grand gesture to impress others, but as a way of life, as a non-negotiable value. Because in the end, we will not be remembered for the titles we won or the victories we accumulated, but for the impact we made on the lives of others, for the respect we offer, for the courage we show in small daily decisions, because of the way we choose to see or ignore the true heroes who walk alongside us, often without us realizing it. And in that small restaurant, under the dim light and the distant sound of the world spinning outside, a powerful lesson was imprinted in the air. Never put off until tomorrow the honor you can offer today. Never expect strangers to do what your heart already knows is right. The veteran looked one last time at the flag he held against his chest, as if sealing a silent pact with everything he believed in for a lifetime. Then, with slow but steady steps, he left the table behind. He carried with him the same invisible strength that sustained him through his most difficult days, the certainty that, even without applause, what is right is worth fighting for. Comment there. I choose to honor while there is still time. Because words of gratitude in life have a value that no posthumous tribute can ever reach. Sometimes the greatest battles are not fought on battlefields, but within the heart. In the moments when we choose honor over bitterness, discipline over revenge, mercy over indifference. That's what this veteran taught today, without even having to raise his voice. His life is proof that true patriotism is not just carrying the flag in victories, but defending it on days when no one seems to remember its value. Respect, freedom, and faith are built in the silent decisions we make every day. And the greatness of a hero is not in the medals hanging on his chest, but in the moral strength he carries in his eyes. A strength that remains, even when the world turns its back. A strength that inspires, even when no one else seems to pay attention. If this story touched something inside you, if at some point you felt that these truths are also part of your journey, take advantage and subscribe to the channel. This is where we continue to rescue these stories that time has almost erased, but which carry lessons that should never be forgotten. Also, leave your comment below with the phrase, "I continue to honor those who deserve it." It will be incredible to see who stayed with me until the end of this journey and carries this same spirit of respect and gratitude in their chest. If you can, leave a like on this video. It's much more than a click. It's a sign that you, like me, believe in the importance of keeping these stories alive. And look, there's a video here that complements everything we've said so far. Click and stay with me there. There's another powerful story waiting for you.